Good morning. What is the norm, besides a four-letter word or a guy who walks into a bar? 4 letters, an abbreviated word, a short little word, norm, and yet so many different definitions of what it means. I'm sure if we canvassed everybody in the room, and we're not going to, that we would come up with a whole different number of definitions and understandings of the word norm. We all have characteristics and personality traits about ourselves that are unique, that are different, that are our norm. And yet, I'm sure that if we canvassed people, they would think that what our normal is different, unique, and possibly even weird. Last year, I noticed that I was starting to withdraw. I was removing myself from my community. I was disconnecting from my friends, my family, my social work network, my coworkers. Isolation was where I felt the most comfortable. I was diagnosed with clinical depression. That didn't sit well with me. I told my doctor, I'm not like those people. My doctor assured me that depression is far more prevalent than we as a society are willing to admit and acknowledge. I spent a number of weeks contemplating and delving into what I understood mental illness to mean. And I recognized that what made me uncomfortable about it was my own perceptions, my own stigma, my own ideas of what that meant when it related to myself. I decided that I needed to do something to redefine my norm. I needed to do something that would ensure that I got out of my house every single day. I thought nothing of spending 2, 3, even 4 days at home by myself. So I came up with a project, the Stranger Project, that would ensure that I left my house each and every day. I wanted to go out and I wanted to make connections with people. I wanted to talk to people. It's what I needed to do. I needed to make sure that I got out of the house. By about day 6 or 7, I noticed that there had been a little bit of a shift for me. And not a cumulative shift, just on a daily basis. When I came home from talking to a stranger, I felt just that little bit lighter, that little bit taller, and that little bit more at ease, even if my conversation was only 5 minutes. And it was easier to talk with a stranger because then it was non-committal. I could say, see you later, and walk away from the conversation, whereas friends would want to keep me for hours on end. I recognized that what I was experiencing was tangible. It was something real. It was something that I could feel. And I began to wonder, if I were to share these stories, could I touch and affect the feelings of other people with these stories? This is Bashir. I met Bashir on day 121. And when I first spotted Bashir, I actually walked right past him. I felt uncomfortable at the thought of speaking to him. And I stopped myself when I got about 10 feet away and thought, what's the worst that could happen, Colin? The worst that could happen in my mind at that point was that he would yell and scream at me. That was nothing new. I've been yelled at. I've been screamed at before. So I thought I'd step outside of my comfort zone and I would go and approach him. So I went up to him, did my usual, I'm a writer, I'm working on this project. I wonder if you would mind talking to me. He was one of the most eloquent, highly educated, gentlest souls I've met in a very long time. Bashir is from Mogadishu in Somalia. He is the 4th of 19 children to his father, and the 3rd of 4 children to his mother. Every day he went to religious school in the morning, he went to a government school in the afternoon, and every evening his parents paid for him to go to a private school, 5 days a week for his entire educational career. He witnessed firsthand the civil war that was raging in Somalia, and he told me that on a regular basis he would see rows of bodies lined up on the streets of people who had been murdered. He said on some days it was impossible not to step on them as much as he tried not to. A friend of his father's was a very wealthy man who was using his wealth to help people escape Somalia, and they got Bashir and 2 other members of his family to the south of Somalia while this gentleman tried to charter an airplane. They managed to get Bashir to New York, and there was a safe home in New York in the Somalian community where he stayed, and it was in Harlem. And I found it interesting because Bashir told me about Harlem. He said I had left a physical war in Somalia to a war of the mind in Harlem. And when I asked him what he meant by that, he said, people get segregated. In Somalia, we are all free to go where we want, but in New York, Italians live in their community, Chinese live in their community, Somalians live in their community, black people live in their community. He said it's a war of the mind. He smoked throughout our conversation. I think he had 4 or 5 cigarettes in the time that we spoke. He asked my permission each time. Would it be okay if I had another cigarette? I knew that 5 minutes into our 30-minute conversation that I just wanted to wrap my arms around him. His story really stayed with me and affected me. This is Christopher. I met Christopher on one of those lovely Vancouver summer days. He was sitting outside near the Olympic Village reading a book. He had taken a phone call just as I was walking towards him, so I turned and walked away and waited for him to finish that phone call. Once I set my sights on somebody, they're it. I've come to, at this point, by day 173, I've come to say what I classify as asking one extra question. It's that question. When I asked that one extra question of Bashir, I said, if you were to classify yourself, how would you classify yourself? He said, I classify myself as a holy man. That's where I wear the wreath on my head. Society classes me as a madman, and I'm willing to live by that because it makes it easier. Christopher told me he had been adopted at birth. And my one extra question was, can we talk about that? And he said yes. He made a note that not many people ask him to talk about his adoption. When he was approaching his 40s, his sister from his adoptive family, who had also been adopted, said to him, I think that we should try and find our birth parents. Christopher said he hadn't really given it much thought, that he was comfortable with his adopted family. He was able to find his parents, his sister wasn't. And he called his mother, they had a conversation, and then he went and he met her. And he found out that she had given birth to him when she was 16 years old. And she felt at that time in her life that the best thing she could do for Christopher was to give him up for adoption and an opportunity to live a life that would probably be more fulfilling, according to her estimation. He also found out that his birth father and his birth mother had stayed together after putting him up for adoption. And 3 years later, they'd gotten married, and they had 3 children. So he found brothers and sisters that he didn't even know he had. And what was wonderful is he told me that he was a little bit hungover, and I said, oh, what'd you do last night? And he said, my families got together for a birthday celebration. The adopted family and the birth family have melded together, and they've become one big family. There's a connection there. If I hadn't asked that one extra question, I might never have heard of that story, and it really warmed my heart. This is Tanya. I met Tanya outside of the bus depot at Main and Terminal, and I walked past her. I wasn't really thinking about the Stranger Project this time, and I walked past her, and she approached me and very softly said, excuse me, sir, can you spare some change? I don't usually have cash, and I don't usually give cash out on the streets. I have on occasion bought people some food, but I said, I'm sorry, I don't have any change. I always make an eye contact. I want to afford that person the dignity and humanity that I would like to be afforded in that situation. I kept walking, and I thought, I wonder, what's Tanya's story? So I went back and explained to her what I was doing with the Stranger Project and asked if she would talk to me, and she said yes. I wanted to ask that one extra question, and I really wanted to be respectful, and I said to her, I'm writing this, and I want to be able to say that I know the answer. Are you collecting this money for drugs or alcohol? Without a doubt, without any hesitation, she was like, no, and I know that that's what people think. She said, I'm stuck. I'm in a difficult place. I don't have a lot of money. I have 3 children who are in the interior with their father, and I haven't seen them in 4 months. I'm $14 short of a bus ticket, and that's what I'm waiting for. That's what I'm trying to get the money for. I spent about 15 minutes talking with Tanya, and one thing that I did notice that I had never experienced before is that I was invisible while I was with her. People ignored us. They walked by. It was like we didn't exist. Tanya's story has changed my perception, has redefined my norm about what I think about when I see people on the streets. This is Hector. I met Hector on the day of the Dragon Boat Festivals down by Science World, and If you've been there, it's crazy, lots of people going around. And I'm pretty good at weaving in and out of traffic, and apparently so is Hector. He kept up at the same pace with me, but sometimes 10 people away, sometimes 5 people. When he got 2, I was like, hey, we should talk. We're going at the same pace here. He agreed to sit down and chat with me. Hector was born on a First Nations reserve. He went to what was called a day school. So it wasn't a residential school. It was a day school that had been opened by the same people who ran the residential schools, but on the reserve. By the age of 8, he had left that school. I asked him why. That was my one extra question. He said, because I experienced emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of the people who were running the school, and I couldn't tolerate that. Hector started working and started drinking by the age of 15, and his life took what some may call naturally a downward spiral. When he was 45, some 30 years later, he remembers being very drunk. He'd been on a week-long bender on the downtown east side, and he had passed out in an alleyway. And when he came to, he saw a sign for a church across the street. He remembers just focusing on the cross. A woman came out of the doors of this church and approached him and said, do you need some help? And he said, yes, I do. They took him into that church and they helped him find his way to sobriety, or at least get him on the path. He continued to go to this church, and they taught Hector how to read and how to write. He was 45 years old and he didn't know how to read, he didn't know how to write. In September of this year, so 2 months ago, Hector started at the University of Victoria his master's degree in social work. Somebody redefined his norm by reaching out and talking to him. This is Liz. When I approached Liz and asked her if she would speak to me, she kind of gushed and was all shy and said, I don't really have anything to say. My life hasn't really been that interesting. And I was like, oh, I bet it has been. Liz is the youngest of 9 children. She grew up in the wheat belt of Manitoba on a farm. Her job before school was to churn the butter and to collect the eggs from the chickens. Everything they ate was grown on or produced on their farm. All vegetables, all produce, the meat, the chicken, everything that they had was grown on their farm and produced. Liz used to sneak off on weekends with her older sister to go to the symphony, but it was their secret. They didn't tell their family because they didn't want to be perceived as being above their station. That was her little secret. Liz got a job after she finished school, and she was working for a stationery company where she met a man, fell in love with him, and got married. They came to Vancouver, and because they were working for the same company, Liz felt that she should move on to another company. So she applied for jobs. And at that time in Vancouver, when she applied for jobs, she would proudly tell people that she was a newlywed, and nobody would hire her. They said that she was going to get pregnant and go on leave, and that they didn't want to deal with that. I asked her what she did. She said, I got a job in a bank, and I got pregnant, and I went on leave. She stayed home and raised her 2 children until they were in high school. And then she went back out into the workforce. She started as a volunteer worker in the Surrey Public Library System. She's been working for the Surrey Public Library System for 23 years, and she had just celebrated 50 years of marriage with her husband last year. Liz's story is extraordinary, and it's extraordinary in its ordinary because it's not an ordinary that we all get to experience these days. Liz's story was one of the most successful stories that I have posted on the Stranger Project. People ate it up. This is Pardeep. This is the only photograph in the Stranger Project that I have blurred, and I'll tell you why. I saw Pardeep sitting down at the waterfront near False Creek, sitting quietly by himself, and I went and I approached him, and I asked him if he would talk to me. I told him what I was doing, and he said yes, that he would talk to me, but he didn't want his photograph taken. So I explained that for my project, I feel a need to have a photograph of the person that goes along with the story. We all want to see who this person is without necessarily identifying them. He said to me, and he's the only one who said this, you can take a picture of anybody. Nobody knows it's not me. I talked him into letting me take his picture, gently, politely. And he told me that he had grown up in the Punjab region of India. He did very well in school, but he said that he didn't make friends very easily. He was quite a loner. When he finished high school, his father determined that he should come to Vancouver and go to university and study criminology and learn about the laws of the land in Canada. He didn't know why Vancouver, and he didn't know why criminology. He'd been in Vancouver for 2 years. I asked him if he lived near Falls Creek, and he said, no, I traveled here because I needed to get some peace and some quiet. He lives and goes to school in Surrey. I sat quietly for a moment. And then I asked him, why do you need the peace? Why do you need the quiet? What's going on for you? He said, I'm lonely. I don't know anybody here. I'm not able to make any connections. I haven't spoken to my family in 2 years. I started to get concerned for him as a person, not just as a stranger for my Stranger Project. I told him about the resources that would be available for him at school, counselors, peers, all of that. He wasn't interested. I told him about the anonymous lines that are available for people to call. He was interested in that, so I gave him some information. He told me that he hadn't been able to talk to anybody about this, and I wanted to show him that he could. And I said to him, well, you spoke to me. And as I walked away, he said, that's because you're a stranger, and it's safe to tell a stranger my story because you don't know me. All of the people that I have met, all of their stories have had a profound effect on me. Each person has been an individual. Each person has their own story because everybody has stories. Depression is a disease of the brain. It's a part of my story. I'm crafting the tools and the experiences and getting the help to help me move out from under the grayness of depression. My challenge to you is to think about the next time that you're out and about doing your thing. Think about that person who's maybe behind you in a lineup, or sitting across from you in the coffee shop, or even today, a person sitting in front of you or behind you. If you thought that you were going to be the only human being that connected with them today, and if you didn't talk to them, they would have no connection, would you talk to them? Go out, reach out into our communities. We need to be the ones who break this change, who learn to redefine the norm. Bring back old school style, the art of conversation. Be the friendly you want to meet, so that you can be not a stranger. Thank you.